In this lesson, we'll learn how to paint a subdermal layer for the fleshy areas on our character. All right, great. So this is kind of where we're at. We have wrapped up kind of the clothing elements of the character, and we're down to kind of the fleshy or the skin areas. So the first thing I'd like to do is kind of zoom in here, and I want to go ahead and grab my selection tool, and let's go ahead and switch over to face selection mode for a moment. And we're going to come over here using Smart Selection. I'm going to go ahead and select, let's select the head geometry. I'll shift select some of these arm shells. There is 3 shells per arm. There we go. We'll go ahead and select his other arm as well. So at this point, it's going to be much easier for us if we just grab our paint tool by hitting P to right click and say to hide the unselected than it would be to go through and try and turn off the object for the lenses, select the frames, hide those, select all the individual pieces of geometry that make up the hair and hide those. It's going to be much easier here if we just make our selection, right-click visibility, hide the unselected areas. So again, we have here just the areas that we need to paint. Now, at this point, let's come over to our diffuse layer stack, or our color layer stack for our character here. And you can see, based on the groups, we have kind of the root is called clothing. I'm going to go ahead and make another group here. And you'll see here that pops it in there. We'll just drag it out, just like so. And for this group, we'll just call this skin. We'll go ahead and make a new paint layer to put inside the skin group. I'm going to title this one subdermal. All right, fantastic. So at this point, if you've watched any of my courses on texturing realistic skin in either Mari or maybe even Photoshop, I'm going to use sort of the same approach, only we're not going to spend near as much time detailing the different areas, just simply because this is a much lower res texture that we're working with. So the first thing we want to do is basically paint this subdermal area. This is kind of the area that is underneath what we see on the outside of our skin. This is going to be very red and very kind of blood saturated, if you will. And for lack of a better reference, if you've ever seen a skinned animal, that's kind of what I want to paint here. But I don't need that kind of detail. I just basically need that color and that kind of that noise pattern. So I'm going to hold the K key on my keyboard. Let's come over to our project shelf here, and I want to select this brush right here. Now, this brush is actually one of those brushes that ships with Mari, but this is a really good one for sort of creating sort of this mottled skin look, or this this look we're going for. So for this, we will want to go ahead and turn on our edge masking. You'll see that I already have mine on. If we go ahead and preview that, you can see it's set pretty liberally, so that I'm not going to be getting a lot of stretching. So let me hit the comma key to turn that preview off. And the last thing we'll want to do is maybe come down and turn our ambient occlusion down in the shader just a little bit, because we're getting a lot of shadows that are going to interfere. So we'll come down here, and I'm just going to turn that ambient occlusion down to right about there. All right, fantastic. So now picking the colors for this is pretty simple. We'll just hold down the J key. And for the first color, I'm going to go with, kind of a saturated, fairly saturated, middle to dark valued red, maybe right around in here. And I'm going to hit the X key on my keyboard. Now, that's going to switch the background and foreground colors right over here. It's the same thing as hitting this button right here. So now I'm going to go ahead and set my other color here. We're going to go ahead and maybe swing this one more towards a little bit cooler red. Go with something. Let's go with something about like that, and we'll see what that looks like. So looking at my brush editor here for the settings, you'll see that this brush has the alpha component turned on for pressure by default. Let me just shrink this down a little bit here, and we'll start to paint in some of these colors, just to sort of verify if they're the colors we want to use. Might even turn off the lights for a moment. Now I'm thinking that this red right here isn't quite right. I want to go ahead and saturate that and darken it maybe a little bit. Maybe even make it a little bit more true red. And just kind of cycling back and forth. I'm going to take this one, and I'm going to even add a little bit more purple into it. All right, that should be fine. So these are the two colors we'll work with. I may even brighten that up just a bit. There we go. So now let me just clear my buffer with a Control-Shift-C. At this point, we want to go ahead and turn our lighting back on, and we're just going to come in and start to paint in this mottled flesh. Now, I'm just hitting the X key on my keyboard as I'm painting with this, so we can kind of basically vary these two colors in the way that we're painting them in. So we're going to just kind of come in here, paint in a little bit with this one. Come in on top of that, paint kind of lightly, just kind of marble in this color here. We'll go ahead and bake that down. And, you know, we might even want to think about turning off our alpha component for the pressure. So, but I'm going to go ahead and keep it on for right now, just because I know that I can be fairly heavy-handed when it comes to my stylus. And you can always brush lighter. So we're just going to come in here sort of like that. Layer it in. Now, a lot of these darker purples I'm putting around in his neck. Thinking already about kind of the areas where we're going to see more of this this red coloration through the epidermis. So basically, the concept here is we're going to come in and paint sort of this area of epidermal tissue. And then we're going to come in on top of that with, or rather, excuse me, we're going to paint this area of subdermal tissue, and then we're going to come in on top of that and begin to paint in the epidermal. And then we're going to reveal the subdermal through the epidermal with a mask. But we'll get into that in the next lesson, so I'm just coming in basically at this point, and we're just kind of marbling this stuff in. So we'll come in here sort of like so. Now, really, you probably could do this in the UV view if you prefer. I kind of like this view because of the fact that we can actually see a little bit better where the two colors are being applied, the purple versus the red. So if there's areas maybe that, you know, I know that there's more purples and blues that show through the skin than others, then I can begin to paint that in at this stage. So I'm just coming in here now. Let me go ahead and hit his ear pretty well here. Ear's got a lot of little curves in it, so we might want to orbit around that a bit as we're painting that area. And this area right here may end up being an issue we have to address. It looks like the geometry may be folded over on itself a little bit there, so projection painting that may not give us the best result, but we'll just take a look at the UVs here in a moment. And just coming in here, working our way around the head. Now, this is a technique we'll probably want to use for both the head and the arms. Basically, creating this sort of the subdermal layer of tissue. And I would suggest, you know, getting a kind of a nice thick coloration down. Let me just come in and really quickly drop some color on here. And then you can always come back in and clean it up if you need to. We'll come in here. Not that the top of his head's really going to be seen, but just so that this texture is nice and even. Our character does have quite a bit of hair that's going to cover that, so I'm not too concerned about the top of the head. But this is kind of the process I use for painting skin. Now, really, when it comes to painting this kind of detail, you need to ask yourself, what kind of detail are we really going to see for this character in game? Is the camera going to be right up on his face? Is he a main character? In this case, no, he's not. He's a supporting character, a non-player character. So we may not need to spend near as much time on this particular asset painting things like skin details as we would for maybe the focal point of a game. All right, so we've got the head kind of covered. I'm going to come in here and just kind of subtly start modeling in some of these colors. Now I'm coming in with fairly light strokes at this point. Might even come in and begin to turn off my lights so that I can come in and really see what I'm painting. Just every once in a while, before I rotate or orbit around, I'll go ahead and bake down what I've been working on. And just come in here, kind of hit his chin a little bit more. Now you could also use this color setting right here, which will kind of vary between the background and foreground colors depending on your pen pressure. So you can see right there, really hard is kind of that red. Really soft is going to paint in more of that purple. If we were to switch those, really hard is going to paint in the purple. Really soft is going to paint in kind of that red color. So we could use that technique as well. Basically, it's a setting right there in your brush editor. Now, when it comes to some of these trickier areas, I mentioned the area under the ear here. We've got some areas in the eyes that have been pretty occluded from my paint, as well as the nose and the mouth. So at this point, we may want to go ahead and switch over here to our UV view and just kind of zoom in and take a look at those areas. And we'll just kind of just drop some paint on those. Shrink my brush down if I need to. Just kind of paint away that nostril area, as well as kind of these eye areas here. Turn off that dynamic, or that color setting. I personally sometimes just find it easier to switch back and forth between my foreground and background colors using the X key. All right. So we've got a pretty good layering of color down here. There's that little piece that I was telling you about. I might come in here and just hit that a few times just to kind of blend that in. The other ear will have one as well. All right, fantastic. So the head is completely covered here. So again, this is the subdermal layer of tissue. This is what we're going to be revealing through the epidermis. Now, in between lessons, I would go ahead and maybe do the exact same thing for both of the two arms. But when you come back in the next lesson, we're going to go ahead and pick up where we're leaving off here. We're going to drop a base texture down for the epidermis. And I want to show you how you can begin to mask that to reveal this subdermal layer.